All right, today we're going to start talking about the jointer in depth, and I'm going to run through exactly how to use it. But before we can do that, first we have to understand a little bit about how trees grow and how they're sawed at the sawmill. So how does a sawyer take a tree and turn it into a bunch of boards? And if you look at this, this is what a tree looks like if you cut it in half and look down at all the rings, right? So we have these concentric rings that start out at the pith, and then they go out. Each one is a year of growth. So if we count the rings in, we can tell how old the tree is. At the center, you're going to find darker wood, and that wood is called the heartwood, and that's kind of like the spinal column. It's a little bit harder, not as much fluid runs through it, and it's the oldest part of the tree, and every year the tree just gets bigger. It adds another layer to the outside and grows taller. Then out here we have our sapwood, and sapwood is generally a little bit lighter. And if I take this piece of poplar right here and I bring it up, you can see that this inside of this ring is nice dark and green, and that's going to be your heartwood. And then out here is your sapwood, and you can see that each ring is 1 year. So it goes out, and this was actually grown fairly quickly. Down here it kind of slowed down in its growth. Maybe those were drier years. So that's how a tree grows. In the past, we always really wanted that heartwood, but unfortunately it's just not available anymore. The importance of this is knowing that when we saw a log up and turn it into lumber, they take slices out of it, and there's a document that I'll share with you guys in the Canvas page where you can take a look at it and see exactly where all the lumber comes out of a board. But one thing that's super important for the joiner is to know that as we cut a board out, so if this board came from right here, where that's in that pith, or that's in the heartwood, and this is your sapwood, and it comes out here, this board will always cup away from the center of the tree. So these two edges right here are going to lift up and away from the center. And the center's over here, and this is over here. And this is really important when we get over to the joiner, because we want to take our board and put it cupped side down as we run it across. And the reason for that is if we're cupped side down, we basically have two rails right here that run along along the table on the joiner, and it's much more stable. If it's flipped over, we don't have anything but one surface, and it can rock back and forth, and we won't get a really flat surface. It can kind of start going side to side as we go, as we push it through. But with two, it's almost like two skis or rails that they're letting it ride along, and then we'll make our cut that way. So every time we go to the jointer, we have to look at the end, decide which side is cupped. It's not always obvious to look at. Sometimes, like this board, I can actually see it. If I took a straight edge right here, you'd see it's kind of like a rainbow that goes like this. But sometimes it's a lot flatter, so we got to look at that end grain, be able to read the end grain, and decide which side it is. All right, let's head over to the jointer. All right, so this is the jointer, and before we get started on anything, I just want to give you a quick little tour of the jointer. This is an 8-inch wide jointer, which means that if we go over here to the bed and we take a look at this steel, I cannot cut anything more than 8 inches on this. So if something is wider than 8 inches, we'll need to do it in two pieces and glue it together later. This is the fence back here, and the fence can tilt, so it can come back this way, and you can move it side to side. And we generally do want to move it from side to side so we can use different sections of the cutters as we cut. For most cuts, we're going to set this fence to 90 degrees. So I'll use a square to do that, and I'll come in, make sure it is nice and flat. You can see that there's no light coming through that at all, so we know that it's nice and square. With the fence, when you're cutting boards on the fence, if you have a board that is shorter than the fence, so if your board's coming in down here, you must use push sticks. But if it's sticking up above the fence, then you're good to go, and you can go ahead and push it through with your hands. We just want to make sure that the cutter is covered all the time by this guard. And if I pull the guard back, you can see the cutters are in here. And these are indexable, so they're a bunch of little cutters that are all very, very sharp, and each one can be unscrewed and turned if it gets a chip in them. So these actually last quite a while, and because this is a helical head cutter, there should be always one cutter in contact with your wood. So that makes for a very clean, smooth, nice cut. It's also much quieter than older style jointers. but we want to make sure that we keep our fingers out of there always. If your fingers get too close, it can lead to horrible accidents. So this is one adjustment wheel. This will raise the in-feed table up and down. And this is the out-feed table, which gets raised up and down. And you guys should never actually be touching either of those. If I do see you guys touching them, I'll get a little bit upset because this machine, once it's all dialed in, should never really be messed with. But after doing the cutters, you do want to make sure that your outfeed table is totally even with the cutters. So as your board comes across, it hits the cutters. You don't want it dipping down to hit the table, and you don't want it ramming into the side if the table is too high. So you want to make sure that they're totally even. Over here, this is how we turn it on. And this one is a little bit difficult. So once you've pushed it to turn it off, you can't start it again until you release this. And to release it, you need to twist and it'll pop out. It's spring loaded. Then listen when it turns off, it clicks. Let's see if I can show from a better angle. If I twist this, it pops out and then it'll turn on. And then I can turn it off, but I can't turn it back on. So then we get over here, and what we have here is a two-handled push block with a heel on it. And you always want to use a two-handed push block to get across here. Occasionally we'll use two push sticks if something's not going to fit under this, or if we're going up against the fence and we're jointing an edge. So make sure you use a two-handled push block with a heel on it. All right, another feature that the jointer has is after the cutter makes its cut here, all your swarf and sawdust are going to go down into a funnel that's internal, and then it comes out here, and this goes off to the dust collector, the whole shop dust collection. If this for some reason gets detached or clogged, or the dust collection isn't on, it can get backed up, and then this column will go up here. And then once you start making cuts, it'll start shooting sawdust all over the place, and it actually can damage the machine. So we want to make extra sure that our dust collector is on and that it is sucking out dust and nothing's stopping it from doing that. All right, so here we are at the joiner. I'm going to show you this board again. And when we look at it, we can see that this is going to be our cupped side. Here's the center of the tree. So it's going to be cupping this way. So when I take it over to the table, I'm going to lay it down and make sure that my cup side is down. And then I'm going to slowly push it across the cutters once it's going. I got to make sure that I have all my safety gear on. And this is one of the more dangerous tools in the shop. So I have to pay extra attention. I want to make sure that that guard is always covering those cutters. Accidents are fairly infrequent, but when you do have an accident on a joiner, they are catastrophic. So once we have a nice smooth surface on this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and we're going to get our flattest edge. So I'm going to take this nice jointed surface up against the fence. We already know it's at 90 degrees because we checked it. And then I'm going to run this across. So now that we have this surface done, you can see it's much smoother than this rough side was that was just kicked out of the mill. And this rough edge is pretty beat up too. So what we have now is a very smooth face and a very smooth edge. And if I check this, This should be, let me see if I can get some light in there. Oh, there we go. Totally flat. You shouldn't see any light coming through at all. And that is exactly how we want it. So the joiner is used for getting these two surfaces completely flat and at 90 degrees to each other. That's all we use the tool for.